So, hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to discuss Tartaria and the Mongol Empire. Now, a lot of people know of the Mongols and know of Genghis Khan and all that kind of movement that happened, but there is a lot more to this history. And Stephen, I am joined with Stephen today, my amazing brother as always, to discuss this in depth. And Stephen's gone into brilliant research. So, hello, Stephen, how are you doing?
Hello, Zach. Yes, I hope you're well, and I think we're going to have another very good Sacred Wisdom podcast. Yeah, I've gone into a lot of detail regarding the civilization of Great Tartaria and the Mongol Empire, and I suppose, as usual, uncovered some very interesting historical narratives and facts that are either deliberately overlooked or are just I haven't been noticed by many individuals who would be classed as conspiracy theorists in the alternative media, that really give a much more sensible historical outlook or perspective on the connections between early Tartaria and the Mongol Empire before the arising of the political and cultural arising of Great Tartaria itself.
Okay, so first and foremost, just discuss a little bit about the official history to the Mongol Empire, maybe, and just what were the Mongol Empire?
Well, under Genghis Khan, they were unified. So all the different Mongol tribes of that part of Eastern Asia had been unified under the, if you like, the official royal banner of the Kingdom of Mongolia, or the Mongolian Kingdom, and therefore the Mongolian Empire. And so they were really an armed force to be reckoned with. And as we know, really from all the historical narratives, the Mongolians were experts in chivalry, horsemanship. They were fantastic pastoralists. They were able to live off the landscapes around them. They were individuals that understood bushcraft and wilderness survival skills. They were experts in archery and swordsmithing. They were really quite incredible and highly resourceful tribal individuals, and were greatly feared.
You're given this story that they were just almost like a bunch of nomads on horseback running around doing their business and taking over lots of other countries. Connecting it with Tartaria, so the Mongols.
Yeah.
So, how is it connected to Tartaria?
Well, as I just mentioned, the so-called Golden Horde of Genghis Khan and his Mongol Empire really initiated the foundational inception of what was really known at the time as early Tartaria. And this was before the political and cultural bases of Great Tartaria officially arose during the 4th of October 1586, where it was defined as Tartary or Tartaria, and it was a unified landmass in mainly around northern Russia, but obviously encompassing parts of Western Russia that later then became known as Muscovite Tartary, and obviously Eastern Tartary that then eventually became known as Cathay or Chinese Tartary, or even Oriental Tartary. So we know that the basis, the inceptional martial basis, if you like, of Great Tartaria really was known as early Tartaria, and was controlled and developed by Genghis Khan and his Golden Horde, and ultimately the Mongol Empire.
So we're in that period again with Genghis Khan. That was obviously the Dark Ages and the medieval period. Obviously, that's a very strange time because we know a lot of historical records kind of disappeared and things were
That's right, yeah.
reshaped and changed and stuff like this. Relating it to with Tartaria, so what happened there? So we had all the fragmentations of the way Tartaria is broken down into separate little countries.
Yes.
And but what happened with the Mongol Empire exactly?
Well, we need to remember that historically, if you go back to the early medieval period and also going forward into, I'd say, the Tudor age, the Elizabethan age, on a historical level, the Mongols were ethnically and racially associated with the Tartars. So immediately
Right.
there was an ethnic, an ethnocentric connection being made between lexicographers, historians, and geographers. All these individuals were associating the landmass of northern Russia, Great Tartary, known really as early Tartaria or early Tartary, with the Mongolians or the Tartars. So there was already an ethnic interconnection in the inceptual stages in this historical narrative before we see the emergence after the collapse of the Golden Horde and the fragmentation of the Mongolian tribes and therefore ultimately the Mongolian Empire and the death of Genghis Khan and really the continual fragmentation of the Mongolian Empire until literally it was feudal kingdoms in various parts of Eastern Asia, and it lost complete martial and political control in northern Russia, and it was only to the collapse of the Mongolian Empire and the Golden Horde we see the arising, as I said, of the political and cultural bases that was really a very multicultural civilization that's become known as Great Tartaria, which was a mixture of the Nordic Tartarians, these individuals whose ancestry obviously known today as the Slavic Russians, and many of the Turkic peoples who were either directly or indirectly genetically related to the Mongol tribes and various other Central Asian tribes that existed at the time and still do today.
So, with the technology of Hyperborea and all these ancient civilizations, Mongolians, their armory, everything was very beautifully made. It was, incredible,
That's
some of
right.
it, some of the designs of it. And these weren't no primitive culture. Did
No.
these use these free energy type of systems, do you believe? Do you feel that they had access to that type of technology?
We don't have any evidence, even from medieval woodcuts from sort of medieval Russia, or even Soviet Russia, that demonstrate that the Mongolians did have access to occult technology. But what we do know specifically is that a lot of the swordsmithing, their chivalry, the armor that they wore, a lot of it was influenced by the Scythian Aryans. Now we have to remember that the
Right.
Scythian Empire had collapsed and had literally fragmented itself over many centuries into the Scythian kingdoms. And actually, many of the individuals that allied themselves with Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde were many of the Scythian tribes that were literally the remnants from that previous civilization. So they were experts. It's well known historically that the Scythian areas were experts in goldsmithing, silversmithing, and were fantastic in making swords and spears and shields and bows and arrows. They were fantastic at creating armor for their horses. So they had these huge battalions of cavalry
Mm.
that would meet any of the enemies in a great and fearsome manner on the battlefield. And a lot of this was inherited by Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde. We have to also remember that Genghis Khan died on the 25th of August, 1227. And so the Mongol Empire of early Tartary really started at that point to fragment. And obviously, as I just mentioned, we have to. It's known historically. This is an official historical acceptance is that really the eventual complete fragmentation of the Mongol Empire started around the 19th of February, 1368, and it had diminished so much in its martial and political influence that obviously many of the Nordic, so there's the Nordic tribes, the various Central Asian tribes, then filled that martial and political vacuum by taking back their lands, their territories, and
Right.
obviously there was a huge fight back, and obviously a large amount of retreat took place of the Mongolian tribes as they lost control. So then we see after this period, obviously the arising politically and culturally of what became known as Great Tartaria. Now, we can postulate and speculate all day about where a lot of the occult technology came from, but as we've discussed in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts, we know that the civilization of Hyperborea had existed
Mm.
in the Arctic North Polar region, including obviously northern Russia. We
Mm.
know that there are vast amounts of undiscovered artifacts that are buried in the expanses of the Kola Peninsula, it's really where the Murmansk Oblast of northwestern Russia is today. We also know that some of this occult technology in terms of artifacts, gadgets, and mechanisms is probably buried under thousands of tons of silt and gravel and soil that's frozen over in the polar Urals and the northern Urals of the Yamal and Donetsk Autonomous Okrug in north central Russia, and obviously going into the Russian Far East and Siberia, up into the Yakutsk Peninsula, and all around that area in northeastern Russia. We know there are vast expanses there that are undiscovered. There are remnants of Hyperborean pyramids, and therefore we can speculate there's probably large remnants of occult technology. Now, perhaps a lot of this was inherited as Hyperborea as a civilization fragmented into Hyperborean kingdoms. These then saw the arising of the civilization of the Scythian Empire, and
Yep.
itself then fragmented. So there was an inheritance process going on over numerous generations,
Mm.
and a lot of this occult technology was discreetly and privately handled among specific individuals who were entrusted in Hyperborea, as in the Scythian Empire, and then eventually with the arising of Great Tartary or Great Tartaria in northern Russia, with how to manufacture and to use these free energy systems, the drawing down of the telluric electricity from the atmosphere, the ether, to be used as a boundless form of electricity for heating, for lighting, transportation, for biological, medicinal purposes, and ultimately healing on a spiritual level. It appears as if that Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde of the Mongol Empire did not have direct or clear access to any of this occult technology, but certain elements of it in terms of craftsmanship, goldsmithing, silversmithing, the forging of fantastic swords, spears, and shields. So they had the martial prowess, the skills to create a formidable armed force against their foes, their enemies, but they certainly didn't have access, I believe, to the occult technology. So that had
Did you
come
do you think the
through time
actual
for the Hyperborea.
do you think this armor that they wore, it can actually be electrified, or there was some other power that could get given to this armor? Because it feels like sometimes the design of armory and how beautiful it was made, that there was something else going on. And I've looked at
Yeah.
old, when you go into some of the old museums of London, or you find an
Yes.
old
Yeah.
museum with shields and various other pieces of old archaeological
Yes.
archaeological remains. You think there's so much beauty put into these design of armory. Do you think they had
Yes.
another purpose? There was another purpose going on there.
I again, this is open to speculation. I mean, I've seen woodcuts of soldiers in battle for medieval Russia that look like they have some sort of electrical aura around
Mm,
them. Whether that
yeah.
was actually a real kind of electrical transmission from some bodily armor that was used to electrocute their foes while they were insulated against its effects, again, is open to speculation.
Mm,
I know from some of the woodcuts that I've seen, again, through searching on yandex.com, you can't find them because of the algorithms there, that you really, really have to search and search and search on blogs and forums that are in the Russian language and therefore from the Russian Federation. And you can see clearly what appear to be swords that are glowing.
mm,
And some of them look like they have
yeah.
electrical discharges coming off them.
Mm,
You could even speculate, and again, it's just sheer speculation, it's just ponderance. Were they types of lightsabers?
very possibly. Yeah.
Where did the influence of that come from? So
Mm. Well,
again, it
George
goes,
Lucas and John, Joseph John Campbell, the
yeah.
mythology side, he would have he would have been very known a lot about that.
Yeah, so again, again, it's all postulation, it's all speculation. There's no actual, really detailed, credible evidence to say it. And we can't obviously say during this Sacred Wisdom podcast, yes, they had access to highly advanced occult technology, and Genghis Khan was fully aware of how to use all this with the Golden Horde and the Mongol Empire. Because if they had access to that, it's very likely that the Mongol Empire wouldn't have collapsed. It wasn't around for very long. If you actually look at the
Mm.
actual dates of its emergence, it had a
Yeah.
very, very short martial and political
But
lifespan
they're
in
very
terms of its
powerful.
dominance.
The official history is they actually were looking to invade Europe, and they were wanting to take over the world to some
Well,
level. The way
they
they
reached all the
portrayed.
they reached all the way to Central Europe. Yes, they
Yeah.
invaded Eastern Europe and
Mm.
absorbed, the countries we know today, like Poland and obviously Romania and Bulgaria, Lithuania, and Estonia and many other countries were all absorbed into the Mongol Empire for that
Mm.
duration. And they were brutal, they were very harsh, but that's the nature of complete dominance in such a short space of time, coming out of Mongolia in Eastern Asia and then spreading westward. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at the size of the Russian Federation today, it's the largest land mass on earth.
Huge.
It's absolutely vast.
Mm.
And yet the Genghis Khan, he was an expert, an expert warlord, and he was a total genius, to be honest, in what he achieved in such a short space of time. But then when we see the arising on the 4th of October, 1586, of the political and cultural basis of Great Tartary or Great Tartaria, we see that this wasn't really long. There was obviously a few generations of collapse, of perhaps a lot of poverty and disintegration, a lot of gangsterism, and a lot of criminality that was going on before the arising of Great Tartaria took place. And I think the key to that is there was some kind of access, some kind of multi-locational discoveries were made of caches of the occult technology. And although this is obviously pure speculation, I do feel that there's a very strong possibility that is what took place. So it was a rediscovery of the occult technology that had been used in the civilization of Hyperborea in the Arctic North Polar region,
Mm.
and obviously that includes northern Russia. And we know that going back thousands of years anyway, the Arctic North Polar region was highly fertile, and there wasn't this permafrost, and there wasn't all the icy, glaciated tundra that you see in so much of parts of northern Russia today. And obviously, many of the actual islands around there, such as Novaya Zemlya, and obviously Franz Joseph Land, etc., you don't see um, what you see today. All of that was highly fertile. It was a very temperate climate.
Mm,
It
for
was,
sure.
what you see with the Russian taiga forests, for example, with all the pines, the larches, and the spruces that are growing over thousands of square kilometers. That kind of expanse once grew with immense fertility
Yeah.
and bountiful eloquence across northern Russia. So that was once massively forested and wooded. And a lot of that was destroyed through climatic upheaval. We've discussed the first mud flood, second mud flood, third mud flood, volcanic activity, and so on. We don't need to go back into really discussing any of that in detail. But there's been a lot of topographic and geographic changes, not just the martial and political changes that took place with Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde and the Mongol Empire. They were really one sort of say socioeconomic factor that helped to bring the inception of the political and cultural bases by default through the collapse of the Golden Horde and the Mongol Empire, because that vacuum was then filled by thousands of other individuals who rediscovered the caches of occult technology in various locations across northern Russia, and could then mass produce that as on a commercial sense. So there were free energy systems, and that then allowed the easing up of the civilization of Great Tartary or Great Tartaria. So people had far more time to focus on spiritual matters and focus on the Christ consciousness, and obviously the massive construction across the white cities of Tartaria of the light temples, the divine temples. So this real focus on esoteric and sort of vibrational healing took place and
Mm.
became a multi-generational objective for the Nordic Tartarians, the Turkic peoples. So it was almost the complete opposite from what had been going on with Genghis Khan and the emergence of early Tartary or early Tartaria under the Mongol Empire. So the concepts that a lot of individuals have got is really either being put out there as disinformation because they're not aware that it's incorrect, or if they are aware, it's deliberate misinformation. And I've heard all kinds of concepts on a historical level that Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde, they were these evildoers from Eastern Asia, and
Yeah.
the 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 the,
And
the,
we
the
were
pious
saved.
and
That
the
was the idea.
noble Tartarians were destroyed and overwhelmed. Well, they weren't, because they didn't exist as a civilization back then. They were too fragmented themselves.
Yeah.
And this can be clearly seen in the emergence of the Russian Empire, what we can see coming out a later stage of Muscovite Tartary or Muscovite Tatari in Western Russia. around the greater Moscow urban conurbation, we can clearly see that. And that's actually in tandem with the emergence of the Russian monasteries and the Russian convents, and obviously the development of the Russian Orthodox Christian Church. So there's a lot of historical connections and confirmations that can be made that really make perfect sense. And I've done an extensive study on medieval Russia and Soviet Russia and so forth. So I've studied very carefully how, as a nation state, the landmass of Russia, that ultimately, as it's now become the Russian Federation, has developed. And that's really very much the same, going back many, many centuries to the emergence of Great Tartaria or Great Tartaria and how it emerged politically and culturally out of the collapse and fragmentation of the Golden Horde and the Mongol Empire that had been formulated, founded, and developed by Genghis Khan.
Who do you think actually organizes these names of these countries and actually states that this is the landmass or this is the land? I mean, that would have been a great task, obviously, Great Tartaria, but it kind of, it almost diluted all these countries and it went back into a big continent, a big part of landmass, and then it got redivided back up again. How does
Yeah.
that happen, do you think?
Well, I mean, the etymology in the Latin Tartary is Tartaria. We've already discussed in
Yeah,
previous Sacred Wisdom podcast the connections in Greek mythology and Greek folklore to Tartarus.
yeah.
And obviously, that I'm not going to go back into the historical timelines and narratives, but that's to do with the collapse of the Scythian Empire, major upheavals, and massive fires and conflagrations that took place in the Russian taiga forests on and off for many, many decades, causing massive destruction. And obviously, you can imagine what the landscapes looked like after all that destruction. Very misty, very soot-ridden,
Yeah.
carbon-covered, with the remnants of all these trees, and obviously the massive destruction that had taken place. But what we know is that the word itself actually means strong place or mighty place.
Mm,
So that instills a sense of the epic and vast essence of the civilization that arose. Really, it really encapsulates what that civilization represented to so many individuals
mm,
across planet Earth, and how it was then massively covered up, fragmented, and deleted. It wasn't what the policymakers and rulers were happy with in the end. There was a lot of jealousy, I think, and resentment. And when
mm,
it comes to the naming of countries, a lot of it's just historical incidents that have taken place, and it becomes accepted as a cultural meme over many generations. Same with even the etymology
mm.
for Russia as a country. So,
I just find it very interesting how that could be divided, such a big landmass could be divided up and then almost defragment, then kind of come back together and then
yeah.
kind of break up again. And like it has done in the last, 150, 200 years.
But when
I
you look
find
at
that
that,
intriguing.
yeah, it is intriguing. But when you're looking at that geopolitical change of unification, fragmentation, unification, it's almost like an algorithmic process. If you think of the Turkic peoples, for example, they're comprised of various ethnicities, such as the Tartars, the
Mm,
Altai or the Altaians, the Yakuts, the Chuvash or the Chuvashans, the Tuvans, and the Chakas, as examples.
yeah,
We can see also in, obviously, emblems such as the flags, as we've discussed in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts. Now we know that the owl was sacred into many of the Mongolian tribes. It was
yeah,
connected. It represented an omen of the astral plane or the other world. We also obviously have discussed how the griffin and the owl were basically archetypal elements that were essential to the cultural basis of much of the civilization of Hyperborea. They were also revered by the Scythian Aryans, and obviously we look at both the actual two Tartarian flags, one of which is the griffin flag representing the Tartarian royalty or Tartarian monarchy, and the owl flag representing the common people of Great Tartary or Tartaria. So
mm, mm,
we can see there's a lot of interconnections with occult symbolism, with certain etymologies. So where that all interconnects with Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde is that they were initiators, as I've said already. So just reiterating that that's really what the purpose of their own collapse. So it wasn't that Genghis Khan had set out to say, well, I'm going to build the Golden Horde and the Mongol Empire, and then it's all going to collapse, and out of that great Tartary or great Tartaria is going to arise. He hadn't planned to do that. It collapsed simply because of infighting.
Mm.
The expanse of the land masses they were trying to control was simply too vast. They didn't have the resources. I mean, this happened. That happened with eventually the Roman Empire. We know that they couldn't raise the taxes. They couldn't, in the end, they couldn't therefore pay the various Roman legions to guard the territories. And then they abandoned their various military outposts and they left it all behind. And obviously, then mass tribal infighting and conflicts occurred, and those land masses were retaken, were reconquested and taken back over, and the Roman Empire started to shrink and collapse.
Mm.
So this happens with empires, and you get unification, and then you get fragmentation and collapse.
Mm.
And what is so unique about Genghis Khan, the Golden Horde of the Mongol Empire, how they arose, out of Eastern Asia. You've got to remember that Buddhism was not really the predominant religion there. It was Tengrism.
Right.
Tengrism
Okay.
is a form of shamanism based, it's a polytheistic religious process of worshipping astral deities.
Right.
So, they really identified with animism, which is the worship of Mother Nature and sort of like anthropomorphic projection of human traits and human characteristics onto the ecosystems of Mother Nature. But they
Wow.
really believed in ancestral spirit worship in the form of Tengrism, and this out of this this grouping of Oriental shamanists arose this incredible fearsome martial contingent that literally just rampaged across Eurasia, including obviously northern Russia, into Eastern Europe and parts of the Caucasus region, and even down into the Levant and Western Asia.
Mm.
They really were an armed force to be
Do you
reckoned with in
think
such a short space of time as well. It's incredible, really,
Do you
what they
think the
achieved.
Golden Horde was almost it was protecting something? It was protecting this sacred knowledge, or because obviously that completely
Hmm.
reverses the historical narrative we've been given,
Yeah.
because but what do you think on that? I mean, do you think it was protecting something? I'm not saying all for the good.
When it comes to historical narratives regarding what had taken place with Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde, we have like books like Relations of the most famous kingdoms and commonwealths thorough the world, discoursing of their situations, manners, customs, strengths, and policies by Giovanni Botero. Obviously, that's Middle English. Obviously, that's why it translates a bit funny there. So that some of the quotes that you can get from that book are absolutely incredible, very insightful to the medieval period, what was going on the Asian continent, what was going on historically with Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde. And a lot of this information seems to be have lost in the modern age. We don't really get a lot of other information on this. But so you can really say that with the passing of Genghis Khan on the 25th of August, 1227, it really did effectively mean that the Mongol Empire that had established and developed early Tartary or early Tartaria, including in parts of northern Russia, really started to collapse at that point and allowed the way forward, as I've said previously, after the 19th of February, 1368, with the complete collapse of the Mongol Empire, for the emergence of the political and cultural basis of Great Tartary, also known as Great Tartaria.
Mm.
So it seems very clear to me that there's no complexities there. It's not me putting out a wild conspiracy theory, but I think what concerns me with the subject of Great Tartary or Great Tartaria, not just in northern Russia, but all the colonies that did exist across planet Earth, is that so many individuals let their imaginations run wild with the
Yes.
subject.
Yeah.
And there seems to be an addiction to putting out either disinformation, which they've obviously got from other individuals who are putting out disinformation. And
Mm.
then if you go far enough back, there's somebody or some individuals putting out misinformation regarding the civilization of Great Tartaria. And it's just repeated thousands of times over in the alternative media, but there's no
Complete
factual
distortion.
historical. Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
the same with the Great Wall of China. I mean,
Yeah.
it took me maybe 3 to 4 hours of solid research just to get those those historically concise bits of information that clearly showed how it was developed, why the Great Wall of China was historically developed, and the fact there were many different variations of it, none of which was built by the Nordic Tartarians or Turkic peoples from Great Tartaria.
Mm.
And it wasn't designed to keep the Oriental tribes, swarming across Eastern Asia into northern Russia. This idea that it had been built by Great Tartaria, by the civilization of Great Tartaria, to prevent them invading is complete and utter rubbish.
And I think,
And so,
yeah, I mean, just simply put, it's all connected to the technology they were using and the kind of energy, the way they looked at the world. The policymakers didn't like that, and they wanted to
that's
conform
right.
a whole conformist world. So they needed to get rid of certain parts of this history. It's not that all of
Yeah,
history is a lie. There is definitely, obviously, we have archaeology, we have people that have researched this and gone into this in a big way and found a lot of evidence to prove about
that's right.
certain points in history. But yeah, we really have to.
So,
That's it. Instead of going off on this kind of dreamlike idea about Great Tartaria, because it certainly existed, and yeah, they did use free energy type devices and systems, and
they
they
did
did have
indeed. Yeah,
connections to this higher consciousness. They believed in the Christ consciousness, all this stuff. But
that's right.
yeah, it's not something that I think people have got into this kind of complete sort of shift of reality with it, and that can be dangerous. And also as
There's so many
well,
distortions going on, and it's dangerous because it then becomes accepted as and normalized that that's what went on,
no, exactly,
without
yeah,
any
yeah,
historical investigation. Another great example that confirms how Great Tartary or Great Tartaria emerged both culturally and politically is actually from a fantastic quote out of the Encyclopedia Britannica. So we know that the bookseller Colin Fergus MacFarquhar and the engraver Andrew Graham Bell, both from Edinburgh in Scotland, they put together a very interesting statement concerning Great Tartary or Great Tartaria. And I want to read this now because it's such an interesting
please do, Stephen.
statement. Tartaria, a huge country in the northern part of Asia, bordering Siberia in the north and west, called the Great Tartary. Tartars living south of Muscovy and Siberia are called Astrakhan, Cherkasy, and Dagestan. Living in the northwest of the Caspian Sea, called Kalmyk Tatar, and which occupy the territory between Siberia and the Caspian Sea, Uzbek Tatar, and the Mongols, who live north of Persia and India, and finally Tibetan living to the northwest from China. This was in the first edition, volume 3 of the Encyclopedia Britannica of 1771, on page 887.
Wow,
So there you go. It
there's
clearly
direct
shows
evidence. Direct
it,
evidence. Yeah,
it was a multi-racial, multicultural civilization. So you can see that a lot of those Turkic peoples had been part of the Golden Horde of the Mongol Empire. So with its
yeah.
fragmentation, they were politically absorbed into the civilization of Great Tartary or Great Tartaria. And it proves it there. And even there, you've got it actually stating the Mongols were actually accepted as individual citizens in Great Tartary or Great Tartaria after the Mongol Empire collapsed. So it's very, very Pacific. There's no complications there at all.
Mm. Very clear, and you can, there's so much evidence to say about Great Tartaria existing as a country, and
Yeah,
all this, and understand again, we've reiterated it in this and we said it in other podcasts, but it's that understanding that there's this distortion that has gone on throughout our history, and it's created it where these theories have almost become just these tucked away conspiracy theories that don't mean things. But you do have to look at the evidence correctly. You can't just look at this on a surface level. You have to look at certain points of historical evidence, and that is
that's
what
right.
Stephen's done. And the Britannia are amazing. Steve, how did you come across that quote? How did you find that?
Just again, it was through yandex.com. I just made the effort to, I mean, it's, you can't find things immediately. You have to be pretty savvy with word searches. So
Yeah.
specific words and specific combinations and specific phraseologies, if you combine them, will create specific search outcomes that can be very helpful. And then you just click on one, you can find similar pages, and you just make that effort. It really is down to making just a bit more effort with the researches, and
Mm.
not just fumbling around in fantastical imaginations about, oh, great Tartaria, this wonderful place of, this kind of airy fairy mindset, and
And it was
they
magical.
were
There was
destroyed
magical
by the
elements
the
to it.
Mongolians. It just doesn't make it not. They built this huge, great wall of Tartaria to keep the Golden Horde out, and the Chinese emperor and his troops from trying. I mean, it's so ludicrous, actually. We have to remember one thing, by the way, when it comes to the landmass of mainland China, we take a look very clearly that, if you look at the Warring States period of dynastic China, China has always been a very insular country. So the Warring States period was various Chinese kingdoms fighting each other for political control over resources and riches in that landmass. They
Right.
had absolutely, you can go and research all the historical narratives. You don't find reams and reams of historical documents showing that, Chinese soldiers, Chinese regiments under various dynastic Chinese emperors were sent marching all over planet Earth to invade other countries. So it's completely and utterly ludicrous to then postulate that idea, and the building of a wall that's thousands of kilometers in length. uh, it, None of it makes any logical sense in terms of academic thought and cognition. And I think this is where, again, we've got to be very careful with people with these runaway, fantastical ideas and concepts to do with Great Tartaria. There must always be a balanced approach. Yes, Great Tartary and therefore Great Tartaria did exist. They had occult technology, but we need to be careful, because you can see from that quote from the
Yeah.
Encyclopedia Britannica very
Yeah.
specifically that the Tartars and the Mongols are listed as two of the ethnic groupings that were fully integrated as citizens living in the landmass of northern Russia, and they were ruled over by Nordic Tartarians and Turkic peoples of, maybe, shall we say, noble birth. That
Mm.
was seen as the rulers, the Tartarian kings, the Tartarian queens, and Great Tartaria did emerge, it really out of the collapse of early Tartaria and the collapse of the Mongol Empire. And I don't really have much more to add, really, than that. I think that
Steve,
really
it's
explains
amazing.
it.
I mean, I don't know a great deal about the Mongol Empire, so you've given me a great insight. And really, I think you're bringing it down to a ground level and making people approach this in a very earth-based way. We don't need to fly off and start. Some people will go to the extent and say everything is a lie. So even that quote that you read from Encyclopedia Britannia, that that would be reshaped and reshuffled. That's what people
Mm.
would say.
And
Some people,
but then you have
but
to
there
realize
is
that,
historical evidence, and especially these books.
yeah.
These historical books. They prove certain elements. You can only, I'm sure everybody watching this has seen all the information about the 1800 period and how that was all reshaped, inverted, and all these machines were put into other usages and reformulated. But Steve, it really,
I'll just say, you've got to also remember, for example, when it comes to the Tartarstan Academy of Sciences that was developed in the Tartarstan Republic of southwestern Russia, they have done extensive studies into Great Tartary or Great Tartaria at the Tartarstan Academy of Sciences. So
right.
that's something that isn't talked about by Western science. Now, the
Mm,
Tartarstan Academy of Sciences was opened on the 30th of September 1991. We also know, for example, that the appointed Tartarstan president, who was placed into office from the 12th of June 1991 to the 25th of March 2010, by the name of Mintima Sharapovich Shamiev, he was very interested, as were many of the officials from the Tartarstan government, in the, shall we say, the unknown history or the concealed history of Great Tartaria or Great Tataria in northern Russia. So again, and none of that's really discussed. And then obviously we have to remember with the Encyclopedia Britannica that the information that the editors Colin Fergus MacFarquhar and Andrew Graham Bell actually put together in
Mm.
that quotation of the first edition in volume 3 in 1771 on page 887 came from documents that they would have had to have gone through, various documents that have been written in detail, many of which weren't in the English language.
Yeah.
They would have had to have had translated and collated, brought together from various individuals who've written parchment with details that they had from earlier sources, going back perhaps to the time of classical Greece, to the Roman Empire, and coming forward into the Dark Ages, the early medieval period, concerning the landmass that has become known as the Russian Federation today. So we know that there was a fragmentation. We know the Golden Horde was destroyed essentially, and the Mongol Empire collapsed. But the various ethnic groupings or ethnicities then went on to be absorbed as citizens into the arising of the new cultural and political basis of early Tartaria that then became known as Great Tartaria. And I think it's pretty evidential that that is what has taken place in history.
Well, Stephen, amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's really
That's all right.
incredible. And I haven't got much to say on this because there's so much information I know you've researched to show this,
Yeah.
and there is more we could do on this
We've
and
only
go into
we've
detail.
just touched the surface. It's such, I mean, as you know, the document that I've written out is so much extremely intricate and detailed information. We just
Mm.
simply could, we had to condense it down and simplify it, obviously, for this Sacred Wisdom podcast, because it's almost overwhelming. There's so much information, and a lot of it's coming out of the Russian Federation and, other locations on planet Earth. But again, not much is happening with Western science, which is always interesting to note.
It's got quite not used to that kind of way with
Yeah,
science. It's a shame, and
yeah,
how it's there's a limitation on this, and how we're
that's right.
information is held back from us, and that's what we want to do with these podcasts is bring out as much information as we can, and we're not always right. But we want to put this across for you to think about it. You do your own research. You
And
look
this is
into it.
why, and as you know, Zach, that's why we say we can speculate, we're postulating. But a
Yeah.
lot of people that are putting out their own versions of their own conspiracy theories, and they're kind of a lot of them very egocentric and very adamant, and that they are right and everybody
Yes.
else is wrong, and they
Mm.
don't. And as soon as you start getting into that mindset of I'm right, you're wrong, and no, I'm right and you're wrong, there's no a logical academic discourse going on to actually
No.
get to the root of the actual credible information to confirm exactly in the historical narrative what took place, why, for example, a civilization was destroyed, why another civilization arose, what were the factors involved, why did that happen. It all
Mm.
gets blurred and distorted and mixed up, and it becomes very confusing for many individuals who are new to the information, and you're trying to bring them on board to really convey it, and you've got to get through all this murky sort of fogginess that's being created by other people who are deliberately creating distortion and diversion. And it's really because they just want to say, look at me, and it's I've got the information over here,
But
and it's another ego talking. And
it's
then
very
and
important that we, academics higher at higher levels look at this information and actually understand it and actually do question it, because
yeah,
there is a lot of, around a lot of our history, there is a lot of questions to be asked that we're given these narratives that most people just accept. And you can see it when in this day and age, the way people are very accepting of ludicrous narratives of what's happened there throughout ages. Our book is available, Luminous Worlds, on Amazon in ebook and paperback. And there is a book on Tartaria coming out in the very near future.
there is
And
indeed,
Stephen,
absolutely.
amazing, mate. Really good. Is there anything else you'd like to?
I think I said everything I want to say about Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde and the Mongol Empire. What he achieved in a short space of time was incredible, truly incredible. And they were experts in martial prowess, the chivalry, fantastic at forging swords and spears and armor and everything else. They were incredibly clever and resourceful individuals. There's no two ways about that. They didn't destroy in any way Great Tartary or Great Tartaria because it hadn't emerged culturally and politically at that time. The timelines just don't make any sense in terms of the official or officially given historical narratives in regards to Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. What we do know is with its collapse, as I've really demonstrated, and as we've discussed in this Sacred Wisdom podcast, it clearly seems that with the collapse of the Mongol Empire and therefore early Tartary, that allowed for the creation of culturally and politically of Great Tartary or Great Tartaria in northern Russia and elsewhere on planet Earth.
Thank you, Steve. It's amazing.
Yes.
Well, everybody, remember to hit that notification bell so you're notified of all the new videos coming up. And it's bye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.